r/ask Reddit. Posted by Reddit user YourFatBuddy. I found a dead girl when I was 12. Reddit. What are your unforgettably creepy moments? Fair is fair, so I'll start with my own story. There are a few friends who may read this and recognize this as the story I tell when I've had a few too many and cry at the end. This isn't really the kind of thing you can shake off. I'm from a middling college town, born and raised. It has blown up over the last 8 years or so, but when I was a kid, it was still pretty quaint. I was a woods kind of kid. I didn't know if these exist anymore, but I had no desire to be inside ever. I was happy if I was outside, happier if I was in a tree, happiest when I was on an adventure. My adventures took me further and further out from my home. Not that far, but my best friend had a satellite mom that would try to neuter us the minute the youngest cried. So I made friends with the scary kid that didn't seem to have any parents and didn't mind picking up dead birds and putting them in plastic bags. Yeah, makes as much sense as it reads. Whatever. It was fucking terrifying when I was young. Behind where we lived, there was a solid 20 minutes of woods. Then, a community garden for the ethnic portion of the local university. I'm not saying ethnic in a bad way, it was just, well, if we broke through the woods and ran through the fields, we would not hear a single lick of English. It was being on a different planet, and I think both of us liked that. I certainly did. Past the garden plots were a broken down farmhouse and what was definitely a playhouse of yesteryear. The farmhouse was dark and full of sharp things. I gave up on going for more than 4 steps in when one of the neighborhood kids, hover moms, stepped on a nail and we had to carry him to the nearest culvert of my home. The playhouse was ours though. Safe, small, a little scary. We'd bring the neighborhood girls out there and eat awful sandwiches like we were goddamn kings of the world. So, dead girl, right. Dilapidated playhouse was my damn castle. It was pretty early, gonna say 8 a.m. or so. I'd always preferred the earliest cartoons, droids on Sci-Fi, Mighty Max at 7. So I was out and about, I think generally angry at everyone else for not being awake. Nothing happening, so I was off to my favorite haunt. Skip across the ridiculously crappy dam, dunk under stupid high fence, and home free. No idea what I was planning to do with my day. I had my stupid Little League bat for trouble. I was cool as shit. I duck under barriers near the playhouse, and I see feet. I kept crawling forward. I really wish I had not done this. I'm in the playhouse, and a girl is in there. She's pale and bluish, not moving. Her lips are cracked and purplish inside. I grab her arm and it feels like a fish. I ran home and didn't mention this for 8 years. She was gone that afternoon. When I was 12 years old, my friends and I were riding our bikes through some woods, down an old dirt road that wasn't used much anymore. I decided it would be cool for me to go off-road and rode off into the forest. I got about 50 feet before I disoriented and started going towards the creek, which was in a dell down a steep hill from there, something else I also didn't know. So I crashed down the hill and hit a huge boulder collection before coming to a rest. While I was sitting there, off towards the road, I could hear my friends calling to me, so I knew which way to go. I started over towards their voices and saw a super old rusted out car. I was a huge license plate collector back then, and finding rusted out cars in the woods was not that odd of an occurrence. So I went to see if I could harvest the license plate. When I got there, I saw there were bones in the front seat and a pile of rags. It was full on Raiders of the Lost Ark with a skeleton on a pike kind of thing. I screamed like a little girl and got the hell out of there. I told my parents later, who called the police, and after some investigation, determined that the man had disappeared during the blizzard in the 50s and was never heard from again. I met his widow and children and won an award from the town. I'll never forget that feeling. creepy as hell. One night, after returning from the grocery store with about $150 worth of food and settling into bed, I heard the most blood-curdling scream. Because of the location, it echoed several times. I sat bolt upright. The screams continued. I could never describe them with accuracy, but I can say no human would ever make such a noise unless they were being brutalized to the point of death. My blood turned to ice. Then I realized where the screams were coming from. The owner's unit, upstairs. I couldn't leave the apartment without descending the vertical mountain it was perched on. Because it was so late, there was no way to do so safely. I froze. The screams continued, interrupted only by loud bangs that sounded like someone was getting thrown against the wall before crumpling to the floor. Besides the fact the owner was a large, now clearly violent man, I couldn't go upstairs without facing his territorial dogs. Not knowing what else to do, I called campus security. They offered to come out, but they didn't know how to find me. Roads in that area are often unnamed, and if they do have names, few know them. I gave him enough direction to get him to the nearby marina, and held my breath as I flickered the porch lights of my apartment. A feeling of relief swept me as I saw him making the turn onto the dirt road that would bring him to the building. The security officer tried to get upstairs to the apartment, but it was blocked by the dogs. The woman's screams still continued as barking dogs joined in, each echoing individually off the low mountains. Also, not knowing what to do, the officer called the police. We repeated the process of flickering the porch lights, and the security officer went to speak to the police. I stayed in my own apartment level, not daring to be seen by the owner and targeted. The police officer yelled at the owner's door, but it was almost, if not entirely, drowned out by the barks and screams. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the screams stopped, and the dogs quieted. I heard the front door upstairs open, a brief, muted exchange. I saw the police officer speak to him again, with campus security, who then returned to me. He said the owner said his wife just found out her mother died, and was just upset over the news. I asked if either of them had seen the woman, and made sure she was okay. They had asked, but were told she's too upset to be seen right now. Both the security officer and I knew this was utter bullshit. We had both heard the screams, the disturbing sounds from upstairs. The fact the woman was unavailable sealed it. He said the police officers would stay outside to monitor the property for the rest of the night, then leaned into me and whispered, "Leave. He knows it's you." They, the cops, do nothing. I called a cab and told the driver to park at a certain distance away from the apartment building. The security officer and cabbie helped me quickly load up my items. I offered them whatever food there was and split it for their families. I went to a nearby hotel until the airport opened, then caught the first flight home. It was my junior year of high school. I was one of the captains on the football team. I played center on the line, and typically, the first game of the year is full of anxiety and nervousness. But for me, for whatever reason, I felt more confident than ever. I was having a fantastic game blocking people, shoving them into the dirt, and having so much fun while doing it. There was this kid, we'll call him K, that had just as much excitement and energy running through his veins. He was on the opposite team. He was hitting people hard and rushing my line very often. Now, the disturbing part that I can never get over was on one of the last plays of the game, when our running back broke through and was making some yards. And this kid K went for the tackle, and for whatever reason, he just collapsed on the turf. At the time, everyone thought it was a muscle spasm, maybe a cramp. When our trainer went out and then signaled for the paramedics, we knew it was serious. Possibly a broken bone, maybe a shoulder. Terrible way to start a season. Everything was quiet, and we thought we'd be resuming the game anytime. But after about 10-15 minutes, we noticed this wasn't any normal injury. He hadn't moved the whole time. And then it hit us. He hasn't moved since he fell down. They turned him over. They lifted his arm and it dropped to the floor. When the EMTs finally came, it seemed to be too late. If you read the papers or see the news reports, they say that he stuck his hand up and gave a gesture to let everybody know that he was okay. But we all saw that the gesture was just his hand flopping off to the side of him. And the thing that always gets me is they allowed his mother to come down from the stands and be with him. She was screaming, crying, and as a parent now, I could never imagine seeing your son lifeless on the floor. They took him to the nearest hospital, where he was pronounced dead. It turned out he had a myocardial rupture right at that play. Nobody knew he had any health conditions. A lot of us had heard rumors that there were substances involved. But that's not how we chose to remember him. We honored him that whole season. But every time I think about him, I can just think the screaming of his mother on that field. I work fairly close to home. The walk only takes me about 5 minutes. I usually start my day pretty early, maybe about 6 a.m. I worked in an industrial area for a rental company. In this area, you have a lot of homeless going in and out during the nights, mainly trying to stay warm. Boatyard there, and they had a nasty habit of breaking through the tarps and laying in the boat. It had been cold the whole weekend, and this Monday morning that I walked into work, I noticed police were everywhere. I wasn't able to make it into the office portion. I was pulled aside by an officer and asked if I could ID somebody. They took me to the boatyard and took me on top a boat. When they removed the cover, what I saw was a bloated, blistered mess. The man was one I recognized from around the area, a local, if you will. He had blisters all over his body, and the smell was absolutely pungent. What had happened was that he was laying in the boat, but he had a portable propane heater that he stuck in there as well. And without letting any oxygen in and the propane running, he ended up killing himself by poisoning. I will never forget that disturbing sight and the disgusting smell. When I was 18 and invincible, I drove down a local place where teenagers and creepers hung out with a couple of friends. A few minutes into the ride, one of my friends gets a call to pick up some dude to go as well, but they were arguing about it not being safe for him. He was also young and invincible, so we persuaded her to let him come, and I picked him up. In the car, they started arguing again, and I found out that he got some skeevy gang leader's sister pregnant and ran out on her, and he had a hit on him. I didn't take this too seriously, because we lived in a place with 70,000 people maybe. Well, when we got there, we took a couple of laps around the cruising, and when he was attracting too much attention, I went to park. No sooner did he get out of the car, 5 cars surrounded mine. A dozen or so people bolted out and started to beat the ever-living shit out of him with wooden and metal baseball bats. He ran around screeching, trying to hide on the various sides of my car, while we were forced back inside to witness. Within probably 2 minutes, it felt like days, the cops came and the people with bats fled, and we were just left there in shock while he lay dented on my also dented car, bleeding against the white paint. I have no idea if he lived or died, but they shut down the cruising after that. And now, I really dislike the sound of bats hitting things, and I can't watch mobster movies. They always want to seem to whack people with bats. It was the day I realized that I'm not invincible, and I needed a new set of friends.